let me turn to Robert Howell. I hope he's going to tell us a little bit about what a sustainable New Zealand would look like.
I had, over the last 3 or 4 years, the privilege of attending 3 workshops, 5 days, mainly at Peter's Farm. And there were a number of people there who are here today. People like Tracy, Tom Head, David Miller, Anne, Ed, and Leonard. I think I've got them all. Who were part of that general discussion that actually led to the book. I then had the privilege of being one of the 5 who were selected to actually write the book, and Jeff and Peter did the final edit. What I learned from that was that my original degree was in philosophy, and then I basically worked in management, both in teaching and in running local governments, running my own business and so on. I had a bit of an idea about some of the problems with the environment, but what I learned from the project was that if you really want to deal with the environment, you've got to deal with the economics. And if you really want to deal with the economics, you've got to deal with the ethics. And I think that involves a multidisciplinary approach, which I think is the first point I want to make. If we're talking about this, you can't deal with it in academic silos. It's got to be multidisciplinary. So that's the first point. I think that since the book's been written, it has been very clear that some of the recommendations in terms of governance will reform the problems that Leonard and various others have talked about. If we're going to make the changes in governance that bring us an economy that is both scientifically based and ethically based in the right kind of way, it's not going to happen in time. The evidence is that we're looking at 2 degrees plus warming built in, and there are people now that are starting to run conferences about 4 degrees. So if we think that we have got the time to make the changes at the international level in the right sort of way, that's not going to happen. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't argue for it and model for it, but I think we need to be realistic that mitigation itself is not sufficient. And this is my second point, is that I think we need now to consider adaptation. And adaptation, mitigation needs to be international. Because what happens in New Zealand is that we get problems from, if something happens in Russia, in the air, ultimately it will come to us. Al Gore's film showed that the ice cores were from all over the place. So you can't do the national thing and solve the international global problems. Mitigation's got to be a global effort. And the institutions have got to be global. And they've got to be far better. But if we're going to adapt, we're going to have to do it regionally and locally. And if we're going to do that, we're going to require a different type of approach as well. As a result of the workshops and the participation, I actually then, it really spurred me to go back and read some of the philosophy stuff that I hadn't read for 30 years. And then I used that to look at the ethical and the economic debate in the IPCC, and the fact that the scientists and the economists have been talking past each other. And I'm interested to hear that there's a seemingly convergence about some of the issues. But I would say to you that if, in that article that I've talked about, that the structure of the IPCC is simply based in such a way that it can never achieve the outcomes that it's designed to achieve. And so while we should still participate in UN and all the other sorts of initiatives, I think we need to be realistic that major sorts of changes that are needed to make significant avoidance of the catastrophes that will come are simply not going to happen. I guess one of the other major things that I've got from participation in the book writing thing is that the majority of the ethics have been human-human relationships. They've been talking about how humans should behave to humans. I think that Peter amongst others has made the whole point that we really need to talk about human-earth relationships. The book in fact takes Leopold's definition of what is right and what is wrong, the notion of integrity and so on. And in footnote number 10, I just refer you to, in fact, that article, which is not published yet, but I'm happy to give you copies if you email me. It looks at other notions apart from integrity. In the literature, there are notions like intrinsic value, respect, and so on, and the way in which there are other alternatives than simply relying on Leopold's notion. But the book, I think, does very well in explaining and describing the limitations of the current model and what needs to be happening. It doesn't really make, it asserts a new ethical statement or principles without actually looking at some of the alternatives, and that I've tried to do that in that article. The last thing I want to say is that one of the things I've been involved in New Zealand in the last couple of years has been Sustainable Aotearoa New Zealand, which is a non-profit group, which has been trying to define what a sustainable New Zealand would look like. In New Zealand, about 70% of our electricity comes from hydro. We do have problems from cars. The major contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is from belching animals. The government tried to put a tax in a few years ago on that called the fart tax, which didn't succeed. But the report is an attempt to describe what New Zealand would look like if it was truly sustainable and some of the issues to get there. And some of those problems are the fact that we are going to have people who see New Zealand as a bolt hole and come here, and we're going to have problems with eco-migrants. Our major problem is going to be with the fact that our agriculture, when we really adapt it to be sustainable, is not going to have the capacity to be able to deal with all the people who want to come to New Zealand when the Pacific Islands go under and Australia runs completely out of water, and rich Americans want to come as well. So those are some of the issues that New Zealand faces in terms of adaptation that are quite different from other parts of the world. And it seems to me that the next phase, if you like, is not just to, we need to do the mitigation stuff, we need to do a number of the things that the book talks about, but I think we now need to do adaptation and some of the strategies and the issues that deal with. And they will have implications for the sort of governance mechanisms in a different kind of way than just state mitigation. Just a personal thing, I would hope that, my hope from this conference is that we can have a strengthening of an international Quaker voice on these matters, and an identification of the key non-Quaker agencies that Quakers should link with to be able to promote this. So that's my personal wish, and that's enough for me. Thank you.